I've been documenting this war for 73 rotations now, every skirmish, every casualty, every tactical failure that costs us another deck of the station. The brass says documentation is essential. Historical record, they call it. I call it watching friends die in high-definition clarity while sipping recycled water that tastes like metal shavings and regret. But today's entry will be different. Today, everything changed. The 14-22-15. Pre-contact status. The human was pinned behind an overturned supply crate, approximately 12 meters from Commander Thexalon's position. Standard urban warfare scenario. Nothing we hadn't seen before in this endless meat grinder they call Kepler Station. Except this human wasn't behaving standardly. Most humans, when cornered, do one of three things: charge with blind aggression, attempt elaborate escape plans, or freeze in terror. This one sat perfectly still, a breathing controlled and measured. Her uniform bore scorch marks from plasma fire, and her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly fractured. Yet she showed no signs of distress. I watched through my scope as Commander Thexalon approached her position. Standard capture protocol. The human raised her hands slowly, but something in her posture suggested she wasn't surrendering. She was waiting. 14-23-41, first anomaly. Thexalon emerged from cover. She plasma rifle trained on the human's center mass. She was young, maybe 25 in their years. Dark hair matted with dust and dried blood. Green eyes that tracked the commander's movement with predatory precision. "Surrender, human," Thexalon commanded in broken Terran standard. His voice carried the typical Zephyrian authority, the grinding bass that made weaker species submit instinctively. The human tilted her head, just slightly, like she was listening to something none of us could hear. Then she spoke. "Your rifle's power cell is at 18% capacity." Thexalon hesitated. I could see his confusion through my scope. How could she possibly know that? Our technology wasn't compatible with human sensors. "Your breathing pattern indicates elevated stress despite your command posture," she continued, her voice oddly gentle. "Ah, and you've been favoring your left leg since the firefight on Deck 5 yesterday." I felt my own breathing hitch. She was reading him. Reading us. Without any technology, any apparent training in Zephyrian physiology, she was somehow seeing through our tactical superiority to the exhausted soldiers beneath. 14-24-16. The moment Thexalon stepped closer, his rifle never wavering, but I could see something shifting in his posture. The rigid military bearing was cracking. How do you know this?" he demanded. The human, I later learned her designation was Staff Sergeant Riley Chen, looked directly at him, not at his weapon, not at his armor, at him. "Because you're tired," she said simply. "Same as we are, same as everyone in this godforsaken place." That's when it happened. Thexalon reached out, not with his weapon, but with his empty hand. I thought he was going to grab her, force her to her feet. Standard intimidation technique. Instead, he placed his palm gently on her shoulder. The moment his skin made contact with hers, something changed. Not just in him, in everything. 14-24-23. Contact. I've reviewed this footage 47 times now. I've analyzed every frame, every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language. What I saw defies every tactical manual, every xenobiology report, every assumption our species has held about humans for the past 6 years of this war. The touch wasn't aggressive. It wasn't possessive or threatening. It was protective. Commander Thexalon, our most decorated war hero, the Zephyrian who single-handedly held Cygnus Base against 300 human Marines, touched this wounded enemy soldier like she was something precious, something worth preserving. And she didn't flinch. Most species recoil from Zephyrian contact. Our skin temperature runs 20 degrees higher than baseline humanoid norms. Our touch carries chemical signatures that trigger fight-or-flight responses in prey species. But Chen closed her eyes and leaned into the contact. For exactly 4.7 seconds, enemy and commander existed in perfect stillness. Then everything went to hell. 14:24:30. Cascade effect. The sniper fire came from Deck 8. Human marksman, probably positioned since the battle started. Perfect kill shot lined up on Thexalon's head. I should have been watching for threats. That's my job. Overwatch protection for field commanders. But I was transfixed by the impossible scene playing out below. Chen moved faster than human reflexes should allow. She grabbed Thexalon's arm and yanked him sideways just as the plasma bolt seared through the space where his skull had been. The shot instead struck her wounded shoulder, spinning her around and slamming her against the bulkhead. She had saved him. An enemy soldier, wounded and outnumbered, had risked her life to protect the commander who had been about to capture her. 14:24:35. Revelation. Thexalon caught her before she hit the deck. His massive arms, bred for war, trained for killing, cradled this human female like she was made of spun glass. "Why?" he asked, and for the first time since I'd known him, the commander sounded vulnerable. "Lost." Chen looked up at him, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Her green eyes held no fear, no calculation, no tactical deception. "Because," she whispered, "someone needs to break the cycle." That's when I understood. This wasn't a capture. It wasn't even a rescue. It was first contact all over again. 14:25:18. Protocol breakdown. My comm crackled to life. Central Command demanding status reports. Where was the prisoner? Why had Thexalon broken radio silence? What was taking so long with a simple extraction? I stared down at the scene through my scope. The commander holding the wounded human. Her blood on his armor. Now both of them looking at each other like they'd discovered something that rendered the war meaningless. I should have reported the situation immediately. Should have called for medical extraction teams, prisoner transport, the whole routine. Instead, I switched off my comm and kept watching, because I was witnessing something that would never make it into official reports. Something the brass would classify and bury so deep it would never see light again. I was watching two warriors from opposing sides discover they weren't so different after all. 14:26:45. New parameters. Thexalon helped Chen to her feet, supporting her weight carefully. She didn't resist, didn't try to run or fight or negotiate. "Can you walk?" he asked. "With help," she replied. They moved together toward the medical station on Deck 6, not captor and prisoner, not enemies forced into temporary alliance. Partners. The war was supposed to end with victory or defeat. How with territorial conquest or resource allocation? With one species proving dominance over the other? Instead, it ended with a touch. A single moment of contact that revealed the fundamental lie underlying everything we'd been fighting for. That we were enemies because we were different. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. We were enemies because we'd forgotten how to see the person behind the uniform. Personal note. 23:47:33. I'm ending today's log entry here. Though there's so much more to document. What happened in medical. The conversations between Chen and Thexalon. The way her squad reacted when they realized their sergeant wasn't coming back the same way she left. But some things are too fragile for official records. Some moments of truth are too precious to survive bureaucracy. What I will say is this. Tomorrow, when Command reviews the day's activities, they'll find a standard engagement report. Routine contact with enemy forces. But no significant developments. They won't read about the touch that ended a war. They won't learn about the human who saved her captor. They won't discover that their most trusted field commander spent 6 hours in deep conversation with an enemy soldier and emerged questioning everything we thought we knew about this conflict. Some stories are too dangerous for the official version of history. This is one of them. An end log entry, 4,847. Timestamp, 235214, file archived under personal documentation, classification level, eyes only. I didn't sleep last night. Not because of the endless bombardment echoing through the station hull. Not because of the stale air recyclers grinding like dying machinery. Not even because of the terrible coffee that tastes like liquid disappointment. I didn't sleep because I kept thinking about the touch. 9:02:17, Medical Bay Observation. This morning I found myself stationed outside Medical Bay 6 Alpha under the pretense of security monitoring. Official designation, ensuring prisoner compliance during treatment. Unofficial reality. I needed to understand what I'd witnessed yesterday. Through the observation window, I could see them. Commander Thexalon sat in the standard-issue metal chair that looked comically small beneath his frame. And his posture was wrong. Not the rigid military bearing I'd known for 3 years, but something looser. Human, almost. Chen lay on the medical cot, her wounded arm sealed in a bioregeneration sleeve. The standard prisoner restraints hung unused on the bed rail. They were talking, not interrogating, not negotiating, just talking. 9:14:52, first conversation fragment. On Zephyr Prime, Thexalon was saying, we have a ritual called Kethmoran, the sharing of burdens. His voice carried none of yesterday's authority. He sounded almost uncertain, like someone testing unfamiliar words. Chen turned her head toward him, wincing slightly from the movement. What kind of sharing? When someone in the community faces overwhelming hardship, loss of family, exile, failure in honor combat, the Kethmoran allows others to carry part of that burden. Not to fix it, not to solve it, simply to share the weight. I adjusted my audio sensors. I'd straining to catch every word. This was unprecedented. Zephyrian cultural practices were classified information, never shared with enemy personnel. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then, we have something similar. We call it having someone six, watching their back, making sure they don't face things alone. Your military terminology is quite poetic, Thexalon observed. Yours too. Kethmoran. It sounds like breathing together. That's actually quite accurate. The literal translation is breath sharing. 9:22:33, shift change, interruption. Dr. Vex High entered for his morning rounds, and the conversation ceased immediately. Both Thexalon and Chen shifted into formal military postures, prisoner and captor playing their assigned roles. But I'd seen the moment of hesitation before they remembered they were supposed to be enemies. I'd watched them realize they were performing a war that no longer felt real to them. Commander, Doctor. Vex High addressed Thexalon. The prisoner's injuries are healing adequately. She'll be ready for transfer to the detention facility within the rotation. Transfer denied, Thexalon replied without hesitation. Vex High's medical tendrils twitched in surprise. Sir, the prisoner remains under my direct supervision for continued tactical debriefing. It was a lie. We all knew it. Tactical debriefing didn't require medical bay proximity. And it didn't require the commander to spend 14 straight hours in the same room as his prisoner, but Vex High was too junior to challenge a field commander. He noted something on his medical pad and left without further comment. The moment the door sealed, both figures relaxed again. They were protecting each other, protecting whatever was happening between them. 9:28:16, second conversation fragment. You didn't have to save me yesterday, Thexalon said once they were alone again. I know. It was tactically unsound. You could have used my exposure to escape. Chen shifted on the medical cot, her green eyes focused on the ceiling. Yeah, I could have. Why didn't you? The question hung in the recycled air between them. I found myself leaning closer to the observation window, my own breathing unconsciously synchronized with the rhythm of their conversation. "You know that moment," Chen said finally, "right before combat engagement, when everything goes quiet? When all the noise and chaos just stops, and you see the situation with perfect clarity?" Thexalon nodded slowly. "That's what happened when you touched my shoulder. Everything went quiet. And in that quiet, I didn't see an enemy commander. I saw someone who was as tired of this war as I was. And in that moment of clarity, you chose to save me. I chose to save us both." 9:35:47. Historical context. I need to pause this documentation to provide context that won't exist in official records. This is day 2191 of the Kepler conflict, 6 years of grinding warfare over a space station that was supposed to be neutral territory, 6 years of tactical victories that led nowhere, strategic gains that cost more than they were worth. Neither side was winning. Both sides were dying. The official casualty count stands at 47,000 Zephyrian personnel and approximately 51,000 human forces. Unofficially, those numbers are conservative estimates. We stopped counting accurately after year 4. Command on both sides continues the conflict because stopping would require admitting it was meaningless. Politicians and generals who committed resources to this war cannot acknowledge that those resources were wasted. But the soldiers, we know better. We've always known better. We just never found a way to say it out loud until yesterday. 9:41:23, third conversation fragment. "Tell me about your unit," Thexalon said. 12-person squad, assault specialists. We've been on Kepler for 8 months. Casualties? Chen was quiet for a long moment. 7. Thexalon's mandibles clicked softly, a Zephyrian expression of sympathy. "I'm sorry." Martinez went first, sniper on deck 14, then Kowalski to an improvised explosive. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Kim died in the same firefight. Plasma overload in a confined space. Chen and Williams. Her voice broke slightly. IED in the maintenance tunnels. They were just trying to restore power to the civilian quarters. Your losses are personal. Every loss is personal. Martinez had a daughter, 5 years old. Thompson was going to propose to his partner when he got home. And Kim was studying xenobiology, wanted to work in diplomatic relations after his service ended. She looked directly at Thexalon. They weren't statistics. They were people. "As were mine," the commander replied quietly. "Vashkol, Threndar, Kexhai the Younger, 23 others over the past 6 years. What did they want? When this was over, Vashkol wanted to return to the crystal farms of his birth province. Threndar had composed 17 songs she planned to perform at the Festival of Rising Stars. Kexhai wanted to study human literature. He found your poetry fascinating." They sat in silence for several minutes. 2 enemy officers sharing the weight of their losses, practicing Keth Moran without realizing it. 10:17:34. Status report. Interruption. My comm unit crackled. Central Command requesting status update on prisoner interrogation. So standard protocol required immediate response with tactical intelligence gathered, prisoner cooperation levels, and estimated timeline for information extraction. I stared through the observation window at Thexalon and Chen. They had moved closer together. He'd pulled his chair beside her medical cot. Their conversation had shifted to something quieter, more intimate. She was describing her home colony. He was explaining Zephyrian family structures. They weren't interrogator and prisoner. And they were 2 people discovering they shared the same fundamental desires: to end the killing and go home to the people they loved. I switched off my comm unit. Technical malfunction, I would report later. Interference from medical equipment. Another lie in service of something more true than official reality. 10:23:19. The question. Chen asked the question that changed everything. What if we stopped? Thexelon looked at her. Stopped what? This, the war. What if we just... stopped? It's not that simple. Why not? You and I could stop, here, now. We could lay down our weapons and refuse to fight each other anymore. Command would never... Command isn't here. It's just you and me in this room. Two people who are tired of killing each other over a chunk of metal in space that doesn't belong to either of us. Thexelon was quiet for a long time. I could see him working through the implications, the impossibilities, yet the absolute logical insanity of what she was suggesting. One person can't stop a war, he said finally. Maybe not, Chen agreed, but two people can stop being enemies. 10:29:45. Personal recognition. That's when I understood what I was really witnessing. This wasn't just two soldiers finding common ground. This wasn't even about ending the Kepler conflict. This was about something much more fundamental, the recognition that the person on the other side of the battlefield was exactly that. A person. Chen had looked at Thexelon and seen past his alien physiology, his military rank, his species allegiance, to the individual underneath. Someone with fears and hopes and losses and dreams. And Thexelon had recognized in her the same dignity, the same fundamental worth that he would accord to any member of his own species. The touch yesterday hadn't been the end of their enmity. It had been the beginning of their shared humanity. 10:35:58. The Pact. If I could guarantee your safe return to your unit, Thexelon said, would you carry a message? Chen turned to face him fully. What kind of message? That this doesn't have to continue. That there are alternatives to endless war. They'll court-martial me for even listening to enemy proposals. And my own command will execute me for unauthorized negotiations with the enemy. They looked at each other for a long moment. Two career soldiers contemplating the end of everything they'd been trained for. I'll carry your message, Chen said quietly, if you'll carry mine. What's your message? That we're all just people trying to get home. Thexelon extended his hand toward her. Well, not to shake hands. Zephyrians don't share that custom, but to touch palms, the way they had yesterday. Chen reached out and pressed her palm against his. For the second time in 2 days, enemy and commander made contact. This time, I knew I was watching the birth of peace. Personal note, 1642-17. I've been monitoring communications all day, waiting for reports of what happened in Medical Bay, 6 Alpha to reach Central Command. So far, nothing. Dr. Vexhai filed his standard medical report. Her prisoner healing adequately, no complications, no additional notes. Commander Thexelon submitted his routine status update. Prisoner secure. Tactical debriefing ongoing. No immediate intelligence gathered. Neither mentioned the hours of conversation. Neither reported the complete breakdown of prisoner capture protocols. Neither documented the moment two enemies decided to become allies. Maybe they understand, like I do, that some truths are too fragile for official documentation. Or maybe they're protecting something that's bigger than regulations and chain of command and military procedure. Maybe they're protecting hope. End log entry 4848. Timestamp 1647:33. File archived under personal documentation, classification level, eyes only. Today, Staff Sergeant Riley Chen walked out of Medical Bay 6 Alpha as a free combatant, not an escaped prisoner, not a hostage exchange, not a tactical release for information. Free. Commander Thexelon opened the door. I handed her back her sidearm and told her she could go. That should have been the end of everything. Court-martial for Thexelon, disciplinary action for everyone who witnessed it, a complete breakdown of military protocol that would echo through command structures for decades. Instead, it was the beginning of something none of our tactical manuals had prepared us for. 1830-45. The release. I was positioned at my standard observation post when Chen emerged from the medical bay. As she moved carefully, her wounded arm still restricted by the bio-sleeve, but with purpose. Instead of heading toward the human-controlled sections of the station, she walked directly to the command post where Thexalon was filing his daily reports. She didn't speak, didn't salute or acknowledge his rank. She simply stood beside him and began helping with the paperwork. Routine status reports, supply requisitions, personnel rotation schedules, and an enemy soldier assisting with Zephyrian military administration. Every regulation in every manual was screaming at me to intervene, to arrest them both, to report the complete breakdown of command authority. Instead, I watched, because what I was witnessing wasn't chaos. It was something new, something that looked like cooperation. 1847-22, first contact protocols. Other personnel began to notice. Private Keshatal approached the command post to deliver routine communications and stopped dead when he saw Chen organizing tactical maps alongside the commander. "Sir?" Keshatal's voice carried every ounce of confusion I was feeling. "The prisoner is helping?" Chen looked up from the maps. "Not a prisoner anymore." "Then what are you?" She glanced at Thexalon, who nodded slightly. Some kind of understanding passed between them. "Consultant," she said finally. "The temporary cultural liaison." It was bureaucratic fiction. Beautiful, necessary fiction. Chen wasn't a prisoner, so she didn't need to be guarded or confined. She wasn't officially enlisted, so she couldn't be given military orders. She was simply present, contributing. Keshatal stared at them for another moment, then placed his communication packet on the desk and left without further comment. The first test passed. Confusion acknowledged, but not challenged. The 1915-33. Practical applications. The real test came an hour later when the evacuation alarm sounded. Structural breach on Deck 4. Standard civilian emergency procedure. All non-essential personnel to evacuation stations, emergency response teams to deployment positions. Chen moved toward the emergency response mobilization point with the rest of us. "Chen," Thexalon called after her, "you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," she replied without breaking stride. What followed was 43 minutes of the most efficient emergency response I've ever witnessed. Chen's knowledge of human engineering protocols combined with Zephyrian emergency procedures to coordinate both species' efforts. She translated technical specifications between incompatible systems. She identified structural weak points using human construction knowledge that our engineers had missed. When Zephyrian rescue teams couldn't reach trapped civilians in a collapsed section, she guided them through maintenance shafts that only appeared on human architectural plans. By the time the emergency was contained, 17 civilians had been evacuated safely. 0 casualties. The official incident report listed temporary cultural liaison Chen among the emergency response personnel. Nobody questioned it. 1958-41. Communication chain breakdown. At 1958, my comm unit erupted with priority messages from Central Command. "Dao's status report on prisoner extraction. Confirmed delivery of human asset to detention facility. Immediate response required regarding interrogation outcomes." I stared at the stream of increasingly urgent messages, then looked through my scope at Chen and Thexalon coordinating post-emergency equipment inventory. The official version of reality had diverged completely from actual events. Command expected to receive a captured enemy soldier for interrogation and intelligence extraction. Instead, they were going to get reports of a cultural liaison assisting with emergency response operations. I crafted my response carefully. Subject remains under field commander supervision per tactical necessities. Situation developing. Will advise upon resolution. Technically accurate. Completely misleading. I was becoming an expert at bureaucratic fiction. 2034-16. Shift change observation. The evening shift rotation brought new challenges. Lieutenant Vex Corin took command of the night watch and immediately noticed Chen's presence at the duty station. "Commander Thexalon," he said, his voice carrying the razor-sharp precision of someone about to cite regulations. "Standard protocol requires prisoner transfer to detention facilities within 24 hours of capture." Chen and Thexalon exchanged another of their wordless communications. "Lieutenant," Thexalon replied calmly, "or please review Section 15.7.3 of the Cultural Interface Protocols." Vex Corin's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Sir, I'm not familiar with emergency provision for temporary civilian consultants during crisis situations, filed under diplomatic exemptions." I nearly choked on my terrible coffee. Cultural Interface Protocols, Section 15.7.3 didn't exist. Thexalon was inventing regulations on the spot, but his delivery was so confident, so matter-of-fact, that Vex Corin simply nodded and made a note to look up the fictional protocol later. 2048-53, pattern recognition. That's when I realized what they were doing. Chen and Thexalon weren't just cooperating. They weren't just refusing to be enemies anymore. They were systematically rewriting the rules of engagement. Every interaction, every bureaucratic fiction, every moment of cooperation was establishing new precedents, or creating space for alternatives to exist within the rigid structure of military command. They were proving that enemies could become allies, not through grand gestures or formal treaties, but through simple, persistent cooperation. One inventory report at a time. One emergency response at a time. One conversation at a time. 21-22-07. Message traffic. The communications I'd been monitoring all day revealed something extraordinary. Human Command was sending similar queries to their personnel. Where was Staff Sergeant Chen? Why hadn't she reported to designated rally points? What was her status? But the responses coming from her unit were unusual. Chen remains on special assignment. Current operational requirements necessitate continued presence in contested area. Will advise when mission parameters allow extraction. Her own people were protecting her absence, just as we were protecting her presence. Both sides were collaborating to maintain the fiction that allowed Chen and Thexalon to continue their impossible cooperation. 21:35:42, direct communication. At 21:35, Chen used our communication array to send a message to her unit. I monitored the transmission, standard protocol for all enemy communications. Blackbird 7, this is Blackbird 26. 26, we've been trying to reach you for 18 hours. Status report. I'm safe, uninjured, currently engaged in the diplomatic consultation. Long pause from her unit. 26, did you just say diplomatic consultation? Affirmative 7. Situation has evolved beyond standard parameters. Request permission to continue current assignment. Another pause. I could hear voices conferring in the background. 26, are you under duress? Negative. I am operating under my own recognizance in cooperation with Allied personnel. Allied personnel? 26, clarify your situation. Chen looked at Thexalon, who nodded. 7. I'm working with Zephyrian forces to develop alternatives to continued conflict. The situation here is complex. Stand by, 26. The comm channel went quiet for nearly 5 minutes. When it reopened, the voice was different, older, more authoritative. 26, this is Colonel Morrison. Describe your current circumstances. Sir, I've established cooperative protocols with local Zephyrian command. We're exploring possibilities for de-escalation through joint operations. Joint operations? Staff Sergeant, are you telling me you're working with enemy forces? No, sir. I'm telling you I'm working with people who want the same thing we do, to end this war and go home. 21:47:23 Command Decision. Colonel Morrison's response would determine everything. Either Chen would be ordered to extract immediately, ending the experiment in cooperation before it could develop further, or 2-6, that you have 24 hours to demonstrate measurable progress in your diplomatic consultation. If this is some kind of breakthrough, we need concrete results. If it's not, you're to extract immediately. Understood, sir. Thank you. The transmission ended. Chen and Thexelon looked at each other. 24 hours to prove peace is possible, she said. No pressure, he replied dryly. 220117, the plan. What they proposed was elegant in its simplicity, a joint patrol. Chen and Thexelon, as accompanied by mixed personnel from both species, would conduct routine security sweeps of the neutral zones. Not combat operations, not reconnaissance missions. Simple security patrols to ensure civilian areas remained safe. Together, human and Zephyrian personnel working side by side for the first time since the conflict began. If it worked, if they could demonstrate sustained cooperation without incident, it would prove that integration was possible. That the war could end not with victory or defeat, but with partnership. If it failed, well, 24 hours wasn't long enough for failure to cause permanent damage. 220854. Historical precedent. I've been reviewing historical databases all evening, searching for similar situations, wars that ended not through conquest, but through cooperation. Enemies who became allies through necessity rather than treaty. The closest parallel I can find occurred on Earth. Approximately 400 years ago, two human nations that had been enemies for generations were forced to cooperate during a natural disaster. The cooperation survived long after the emergency ended. But this is different, more complex. Chen and Thexelon aren't just representing themselves. They're representing the possibility that two completely different species can find common ground. They're betting their careers, their freedom, and possibly their lives on the idea that understanding is stronger than fear. 221346. Personal stakes. I've made my own decision. Tomorrow, when they conduct their joint patrol, I'll be providing overwatch support. Not because I've been ordered to. No such orders exist for this kind of operation. Because I believe in what they're trying to do. Because I've spent 6 years documenting a war that serves no purpose beyond perpetuating itself, and I've seen two people discover a way to stop it. Not because some things are more important than regulations and protocol and chain of command. Some things are worth the risk. 221827. Final entry. This will be my last personal log entry for the foreseeable future. What happens tomorrow will either validate everything Chen and Thexelon have worked toward, or it will end with court-martials and executions and a return to endless war. Either way, it won't be something I can document safely. But before I close this record, I want to state something for whatever version of history eventually gets written. I witnessed the end of a war, not through victory or surrender or treaty negotiation, through two people who refused to accept that being enemies was their only option, through a touch that became understanding, through understanding that became cooperation, through cooperation that became hope. Whatever happens tomorrow, that truth remains. Chen and Thexelon proved that peace is possible. They proved that the person on the other side of the battlefield is exactly that, a person. They proved that wars end when people stop fighting them. The rest is just bureaucracy. End personal log series. Sub-Commander Kethvar Zunos. Timestamp 22-1944. File archived under personal documentation, classification level, eyes only. Addendum, historical note. Found in archived files, Kepler Station. 10 years post-conflict. The joint patrol conducted on Station Day 2193 proceeded without incident. Over the following weeks, similar patrols became routine. Within 6 months, integrated human Zephyrian teams were standard protocol throughout the station. The Kepler Accord, signed 8 months later, established the station as neutral territory under joint administration. It became the model for interspecies cooperation used throughout the galaxy. Staff Sergeant Riley Chen and Commander Thexlon served as the first co-directors of the Kepler Diplomatic Institute. They worked together for 12 years before retiring to establish civilian integration programs on 17 worlds. Sub-Commander Kethvar Zunos transferred to the Institute's documentation division, where he spent the remainder of his career recording successful instances of interspecies cooperation. His personal logs from the final days of the conflict are considered the definitive first-hand account of how the war actually ended. Not with a bang, not with a whimper, with a touch.